It's been a very special weekend for British motorsport fans, and 315,000 of them turned out to watch the Grand Prix at Silverstone. I was one of them, as was Motorsport Magazine's editor Damien Smith and features editor Rob Widdows. They've both joined me today, and we'll be discussing all the racing, all the big news stories, and I'll hear their opinion on everything that's happened. This is The Week in Motorsport. Right, Rob, Damien, thank you very much for both joining us. What a fantastic weekend of racing. And obviously the big news, Sebastian Vettel didn't win.
Yeah, and it was a great race, wasn't it? I thought it was, loads of overtaking, loads of drama. Fantastic finish with the Lewis and Massa at the final line there. So all in all, I think a very successful British Grand Prix.
Couldn't have written the script better. No. Absolutely wonderful. I'm still on a total high. I thought it was one of the great British Grand Prix.
And Fernando Alonso to win by 16.5 seconds. Yes, Vettel had a problem in the pit stop, but that's pure pace that he won that Grand Prix by, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Vettel himself said that they were beaten fair and square. So Ferrari, you thought in the early stages of the race, the two Red Bulls were looking very comfortable up front. You thought, oh, here we go. But as the track conditions dried out, Ferrari came into their own. Alonso drove magnificently, I thought. And that was a really good battle. I mean, you don't often see, you had Lewis Hamilton pass Alonso at one stage in the race, and then Alonso passed him back and went on to win the race. You don't see that very often, and I guess that's what the new rules have given us this year. But it's you have to say in terms of entertainment, you can't fault it.
Well, everybody goes on about overtaking all the time, don't they? But what we want is racing, and there's a real difference between overtaking and racing. And what we had at the weekend at Silverstone was racing.
But how much was that down to the mixed conditions at the beginning? Because down the back end of the circuit at Copse, and the old first sector was, there was an inch of water there, but on the pit straight, the new one, it was bone dry. I mean, surely that was a huge factor.
There are always factors which encourage good racing, whether it be the weather, the cars, the drivers, the rules, whatever. But we sure had it at Silverstone. And being such a huge site, you could stand at Maggots and it was totally dry, and it was pouring with rain the other side of the track.
Yeah. You look at the last three Grand Prix. So you had Montreal, Valencia, Silverstone. Two of them you can actually race on. They're good race circuits. Montreal is, always provides good racing. Silverstone, by its very nature, allows you to race each other, and when it's wet, you've obviously got different lines, etc. It does add in a helping hand, but by the end of the race, it was bone dry, and yet you still had overtaking, you still had good racing. It's the nature of the circuit. Valencia is not a good race circuit. And that's what it comes down to.
I'm going to pull you up on something you actually said last week. As I said, what's happened to McLaren? They seem to be off the pace. You said, I think it's a bit of a blip, and their car perhaps doesn't suit Valencia. They weren't, especially on qualifying pace, they weren't really there this weekend. Was that down to, I didn't want to say this phrase, blown diffusers, but was that another blip, or what's happened to McLaren? Because there's a bit of dissent there as well, with sort of everyone a little bit cross with each other.
Well, they do seem to have lost their way. I have to admit, there's no getting around that. In terms of raw pace, they didn't have it. I mean, Lewis Hamilton yesterday was driving beyond the level of the car, I think, and you could see how hard he was trying into every braking area, and he got the maximum he could out of that car. They seem to have lost their way. How much is down to this whole diffuser row? I wouldn't like to say. That was the dominant point of conversation over the weekend in the paddock, and it got very dull, I have to say. It was just such a boring argument, and very hard to comprehend for everyone involved, actually. Yeah,
and there's something about Red Bull and Silverstone. Last year that we had the front wing row when they took renewed Sebastian Vettel's wing with Mark Webber's. This year there's team orders row when Webber was closing in on Vettel in the final laps of the race and trying to overtake him. And I think Christian Horner got on the radio 4 or 5 times saying, maintain your position. But Webber apparently ignored this and said, why did I get team orders? What's going on here? Did Christian Horner do the right thing?
I think what's going on here is you've got a very good team manager and a very competitive racing driver, and the two don't always go together. I personally think Christian did absolutely the right thing, although it goes against the grain to me as a sort of passionate racing fan. And if I'd been in the car, I'd have done what Mark did. And if I'd been on the pit wall, I'd have done what Christian did. So really, I think it's a bit of a storm in a teacup, unless you're Mark Webber.
Yeah.
And maybe Mark feels it's time to go somewhere else, and maybe Lewis Hamilton feels it's time to go somewhere else, because these are not happy camps at the moment, and it's quite interesting to me, because I think that the Button side of the camp is a pretty happy camp, actually. They adore him, they think he's a great guy, which he is. The other side of the garage is, I would say, pretty tense, and I feel the same at Red Bull. So there may be some moving around here, I think. And interestingly for me, meanwhile, Ferrari, with its clearly defined number one driver, I mean, no doubt, they forgot about Massa on Sunday, didn't they?
Yeah, it seems strange. Alonso came in for new tyres and everything like that. And it was almost as if Ferrari suddenly thought, oh, yeah, Massa, let's get him in. Because that final stint, he was out for so long.
Yeah.
And his pace was just dropping away.
Yeah.
I mean, over the past few weeks, I've thought that Massa's really sort of come back into his own a bit since his accident.
Yeah.
And his pace has been a lot better. And he was matching Alonso's pace. And everyone was saying, Alonso's building this incredible gap to Vettel at the front of the Grand Prix. But Massa wasn't doing badly either.
No, I don't think Rob Smedley, his engineer, would let the team forget about him.
No. Nor would Pat Fry.
No, exactly. Massa's doing a pretty good job, no doubt about it. Although I just thought it said a lot about the current state of things yesterday, early in the race, when you had two Red Bulls, Alonso, Hamilton, then Jensen, then Massa. It seemed to be almost to be the natural order of things at the moment in terms of pace. That of the top six cars, Massa is sixth, as far as I'm concerned. And Ferrari have to ask themselves in the future: is that what they want? Do they want to be have a guy there who can mix it with the top three every weekend, and the other guy to be sixth of the top six?
Yeah.
Well, I think Alonso thinks it's all wonderful.
I'm sure he does.
And they haven't got a hope in hell of winning the Constructors' Championship, but they just might win the Drivers' Championship. And when we talk about, people being off the pace, the fascinating thing to me about modern Formula One is how much can change in a fortnight.
Yeah.
So when we say, McLaren are off the pace, hey, in Germany they may not be. But if you look at the mid-sector times at Silverstone, Ferrari was clearly the fastest car.
Yeah.
Absolutely, definitely. I mean, they won that race on performance, in my view. Yeah. And quite amused by Damien, saying how boring it got talking about diffusers, because I was out with the spectators and they weren't bored. They were just totally confused. Yeah. All the conversation was, what the hell's going on here? Yeah. What's happening here?
What's a blown diffuser?
And of course, you can't hear the loudspeakers, you can't hear the commentary, you can't see a big screen. Well, you can, but you can't read it.
Not with your eyes, Rob.
Well, not with my eyes, no. There you are, Ed. Yeah. And so you have absolute confusion.
Yeah. No, it is a problem, I think. But as there was a bit of confusion in Michael Schumacher's helmet into the braking zone with Kamui Kobayashi. But apart from that, a really good Grand Prix, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, the moment with Kobayashi was rubbish from Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, I think Nigel Roebuck, our editor-in-chief, said it was very cack-handed.
It was completely useless piece of driving. But apart from that moment, I thought he drove superbly. He had a lot of pace, and he was so aggressive. I watched the Grand Prix, watching on the straight between Woodcote and Copse, watching opposite the old pits, and he was so aggressive into Copse. The old Michael Schumacher. That was really good to see. There's nothing like seeing